Zach Walker with the Defense Innovation Unit, and this is the DIU-ex podcast. It's a tremendous honor to have Colonel Enrique Oti with me here today. Could you share a bit more just about your background and what you do in Kessel Run?
Yeah, hey Zach, great to see you again. So I'm Colonel Enrique Oti. So currently I'm the commander of Air Force Lifecycle Management Center Detachment 12, more effectively known as Kessel Run. So Kessel Run was a project name for one of the projects we stood up while I was at DIUx, and then we took that and turned it into our organizational name for what is now a relatively large Air Force program office. So I've been in the Air Force for 23 years, last 2 years here at Kessel Run, and before that, 3 years at DIUx. They're from inception, when we were just a couple crazy people with some weird ideas, and then I had the pleasure of watching it grow and helping it grow. So that's where I am right now.
Awesome. And I definitely want to get more into the crazy early days of DIUx, but if you could for a minute, talk a bit more about Kessel Run. I know a lot of people maybe don't realize that it was born out of a DIUx prototype for which you were the project manager. Do you speak a bit more just kind of about what that project was like, the prototype, how it turned into Kessel Run, just what it looks like today?
Sure. So Kessel Run was really kind of born out of the idea that a lot of us in the military, anyone who's worked on government systems, you realize you really can't stand your IT. The software we use all over the DoD is pretty bad. It's pretty ancient. Sometimes you go to work and you feel like you're touching technology that's 20 years old. And so in the early days of DIUx, we're sitting out there in Silicon Valley and we're seeing people we know, friends, acquaintances, going from nothing to multi-million-dollar valuations on startups, building really good software really quick. And we're sitting there thinking, well, why can't the Air Force build software? Why can't the DoD build good quality software? And so the idea was born saying, well, why don't we try? Why don't we take something really complex in the Department of Defense and try to build it ourselves or try to rebuild it ourselves? So it took a while to get a little bit of support. We can go into that story later about how we got support for the tasking. But really by 2016, we were able to get a little bit of funding, got great top cover there from DIUx, got some support from Air Combat Command, and we started building an application. We grabbed 6 Air Force Airmen, TDY, just basically I emailed my friends and said, hey, anybody know any airmen that know how to write code? We brought 6 of them out TDY for 6 months, and we started building software. And again, the whole idea was to prove that we can build software, that we can actually build something modern that people would actually like to use. And honestly, what we wanted to do was build a great mission planning tool. We thought that'd be awesome. Let's tackle the most complex thing. And while we were trying to tackle that really complex task, the Defense Innovation Board went off on a tour of the Middle East, along with, at that time, the director of DIUx, Raj Shah. And they went over there, and they're walking around the Air Operations Center, and Dr. Eric Schmidt from Google and Alphabet, he looked at how the Middle East, how they're doing tanker planning over the Air Operations Center, and he said something along the lines of, this is the most egregious example of bad IT. And so after he said that, my boss, Raj, called me and said, okay, forget what you're building, forget this mission planning stuff, forget the targeting stuff, just build a tanker planning tool. Build something that shows us how to do tanker planning. And we did, and we went from nothing to a tanker planning tool in operations in about 4 months. And that was the proof of concept. That's how we showed within the Department of Defense that we could build modern, secure software, and airmen could do it, and we could build it fast. And what happened from then until now is a very long story of acquisitions, intrigue, and leadership and personality that basically led to the program office at Hanscom Air Force Base saying, you know what, forget the tanker planning tool, we can do this for the entire Air Operations Center. And the program office, this is probably one of the, I think, in my mind, one of the best transitions we've ever done out of DIUx. We took the contract, the technologies, and the processes. Again, it wasn't just the contract, we took processes. And we transitioned over to the program office, and they went running with it. With a great top cover from Air Force acquisition leadership, they took it and they scaled what we were doing at DIUx, which was originally the tanker tool plus a dynamic targeting tool. And they took it, they took over, and they started rebuilding the entire Air Operations Center. Since then, when I left DIUx, they brought me into the program office to lead it. And we've taken that program office and scaled it. And so now we are building the Air Operations Center. We're doing joint targeting tools, unit level command and control, unit level intelligence. We're now tackling the F-35 maintenance system called Alice. It's now under a new program called Odin. So we're working with the Joint Program Office in Lockheed, and we're rebuilding that system as well. So we took what was really an idea, DIUx, with 6 people, a couple $100,000, and we've scaled it into a massive program office where I have about 1,000 people working for me right now on an entire range of technologies, all using modern software practices, modern security practices, modern cloud infrastructure, really trying to act like a software company. And the best thing about this whole thing is the concept spread. It spread around the Air Force, it spread to the Navy, it spread to the Army. And I think we've kind of reached an inflection point over the last year or so where I don't think the DoD acquisition is going to be able to go back to some of those old models of software development. Everybody realizes that this methodology is faster, it's better, it's what the user wants. And so I'm really happy. Commanding Kessel Run has been an absolute dream for me. And it really did start as just a crazy idea there at DIUx of, let's just try building software differently. So.
That's an amazing story. And there's a lot of versions of the tanker plane tool story, so I'm glad we got it from you, the real story. And the transition, too, is phenomenal. It was a production OTA, right? This program office was established. What were some of the antibodies that came out, how you got over them, advice that you would have for current DIU folks doing this?
So a lot of this, to be honest, it comes down to leadership. And I think that's really what differentiated this project from some other projects. I think is what's differentiated the program office from other program offices. So I'll give a couple of examples. When we first had this idea, and the idea came up actually in 2015. It was one of the very first ideas that the Air Force element there came up with, which is how can we redesign the Air Operations Center? It's because the Air Force was writing about it at the time. The Air Force had written something called the Air Force Future Operating Concept that had these ideas of a multi-domain operations center. And we looked at it and we're like, well, all those technologies exist. So the Air Force is talking about 2035, what this is going to look like. And we're wandering around Silicon Valley saying all that tech exists now. So why don't we just start? And what happened was it was my functional leadership in the Pentagon, so the A6, General Bender, he knew me but didn't know me very well. But we pitched the idea to him and said, all we need is $100,000. And this is probably the first big thing I'll say is, too many program managers around the DoD and even sometimes the DIUx, they go for the big dollars. We didn't. We did what I would consider a friends and family fund. I asked for $100,000. That was it. And we used those $100,000 and we put a company called BMNT on contract. They're a company out there in Silicon Valley that supports hacking for defense and a lot of other things in the government. And we actually, all we did was run a design sprint. We spent $100,000, ran a design sprint, taught airmen around the AOC community, about 14 of them, how to be design thinkers. And at the end of the $100,000, what we got was three 3-minute YouTube videos. But that's all it took. All it took was a couple of YouTube videos, an idea that we could then take that to Air Combat Command, go to the operator and say, sir, here's what your airmen want Air Operations to look like. Here's what they want an AOC to look like. Here's some videos that they made about what they think a mock-up of software could look like. And it's incredible to see the lights come on in a 4-star level staff is saying, hell yeah, that's what we want. And that's when we did our first, I'll call it a raise, our first funding raise, is we ended up with $2 million. Between Air Combat Command and DIUx, we got a couple $1 million. And to talk about the leadership, this is a 4-star commander saying, yeah, I'm gonna trust some people out in Silicon Valley to help me out. And at the same time, we have Raj Shah, the director of DIUx. He didn't believe it, by the way. He was very clear with me saying, you are tackling one of the biggest, most entrenched programs in the DoD. There's no way you can do this. I think you're gonna fail. But go ahead and try. We'll give you some DIUx money. And what he did was he actually set me up with venture capitalists in Silicon Valley to mentor me, which to me is one of the greatest things that ever happened while I was at DIUx, is having a couple of VCs sit me down and say, as a program manager, we're gonna treat you like one of our startup CEOs. You gotta view this like a company. How would a startup CEO find their product market fit? How would they do their funding raises? How would they make sure that the stakeholders are happy? And that mentorship of how to act like a startup that Raj gave me, was probably one of the best things we did. Again, he did not believe I was going to succeed. And he's told me after the fact he was surprised I succeeded because he thought this was too intractable. But again, it's great leadership. And then the third part of leadership was actually when the program office found out what we're doing, their initial response was, who are you? Who said you're allowed to tackle the AOC? That's our job. And they came out in force. I think it was April of 2017. They came out to Silicon Valley and we said, look, we know you don't believe us now. Give us some time. And we spent 3 days taking them to companies around the valley, showing them what we're building, showing them the new process. And what you have is a program executive, Mr. Steve Wirt, at Lifecycle Management Center who was opposed to it when he showed up in the Valley. After 3 days, he's like, this is it. He's like, I've been wanting to transform. I've been wanting my guys to do something different. We just didn't know how. This is the way to do it. And so you have this real leadership of an SCS saying, I didn't know what we need to do, but now I've seen it. Now I want it. And his program office jumped all in, all the way down. The material leader, Colonel Sanders, some young caps like Captain Kroger stepped in, and they just ran with this thing. So again, what this comes down to is finding the right people who are true leaders and actually want to change. So
that's great. It's funny. So we figured out that there's really 3 different DoD partners we have to go for: the headquarters folks, acquisition leaders, and users. It's taken us years to figure this out. It sounds like you figured it out off the bat and really targeted the right folks at the Pentagon, the right folks at LCMC, the right users that could then go do the design thinking and show it. You just talked about that part.
And I think we did it in the right order. And this is where even some other projects at DIUx, I think we did the wrong order. I think this is the one I did it the right order, which is the first thing we tackled was users. We made users love the software. Because once you give it to them and they use it, it's hard to take it back. And after we show that the users love it, when you go up their chain of command, the operational chain of command says, you're helping the war fight. I want more of that. It was only then that we went to acquisitions. I think if we had gone to acquisitions first, it would have been hard to convince them of a new way of doing acquisitions. It would also, they would have had a hard trouble convincing the operators of, trust me, we're gonna do something different, but you're still gonna get what you want. Because the operators, there's a real lack of trust between ops and acquisitions. So I think we did the right route. User first, proof of concept, operators next to get the top level cover from the warfighter, and then the warfighter working with us to tell acquisitions, let's try this. This is new. This is what we really want. And I think it's a repeatable model. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that there was the Air Force element of DIUx, and you had educated me earlier just about all the different pieces that what I knew as DIUx is really lots of different things. And if you could, just talk a bit about the early days. How was DIUx founded? Tell us about this FOB Silicon Valley, right? What was it like in the early days?
So the early days. So here's the joy of DIUx. DIUx has many fathers and mothers. And it also has a lot of people who claim to be there at the founding, which sometimes we're not. So I'll tell you my perspective on my portion of DIUx and how it kind of merged into the whole. And I'll throw into the other parts I know as well. So in 2014, I showed up at Stanford University. I was there for a 1-year fellowship. This is the post-Snowden era. And every conference I went to was talking about how Silicon Valley doesn't want to work with the government, the whole Google hack. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of negative sentiment. And my background, I'm a foreign area officer. I did Latin American foreign area officer. I was a Chinese foreign area officer. I love the idea of cultural interchange. I love the idea of cross-cultural communications. So around 2014, I kind of started reaching back to the Pentagon saying, you know what we need? We need an embassy out here. I was using kind of State Department terms. That we need an embassy. We need air attaches on the ground to learn the culture and interact. Just treat Silicon Valley like a foreign country. There's so much cultural difference between DC and Palo Alto that we should probably treat it like a foreign country. That concept didn't go over real well. So I started refining it, and I ended up writing a paper called Forward Operating Base Silicon Valley. Never got it published, but I got passed around the Pentagon. And the idea was, let's treat this as a FOB. Let's put an operational element out here that can interact on the ground. That concept really took off after Admiral Rogers showed up. Admiral Rogers, NSA director, came out, I think it was November of 2014. And he went to talk to Stanford, he went to talk to a bunch of companies, and he was trying to repair the damage that had been done through the Snowden leaks. And he pulled together a bunch of people in the basement of a building on Moffett Field. So it used to be the Navy brig down there, still has the prison bars. He pulled down a bunch of people, former NSAers, former Cyber Command guys, current Cyber Command. And that's when I first found out that Cyber Command had a team out in Silicon Valley. I had no idea. I've been on my own thinking, hey, let's get the Air Force out here. And that's when I met a lot of really interesting people from Cyber Command, a lot of reservists, and this entire, what they used to call the POP, the Cyber Command POP, the point of presence, point of partnership. And once I met them, that really kind of helped refine my ideas of, okay, here's what we should be doing in the Valley, here's how we can do it. And really my argument was, it's great to have reservists, but at some point we need active duty where this is your full-time job, you're showing the uniform, you have an active, continuous presence versus a part-time presence. So I refined my concepts in December, and by April, I had my assignment changed to stay out in the Valley, and I was able to get buy-in from air staff to give me, I think, 5 or 6 officers to work with me. And so I got one officer from Intel, two from acquisitions, one from medical, one from cyber. It was basically a coalition of the willing of air staff, functional leadership saying, yeah, I need something out of the Valley. And we built a team. Originally, it was called Forward Operating Base Silicon Valley. That was back in like the April timeframe. By the summer, a person in air staff decided it needed a cool name. They came up with something called Silicon Eagle. So that was the formal instantiation of something called Silicon Eagle. We even had a logo, which at some point I'll share out. And as I was standing up, Secretary Carter came out to Silicon Valley, again, I think April timeframe of 2015. And he said, we're going to stand up a presence in the Valley for OSD. And this is when I found out about all the stuff that had been going on in the background with people like Chris Kirchhoff and Ross Shaw and others. And I had no idea that OSD also had a team that was trying to stand up a Silicon Valley presence. And so we started having some telecons. And by the summer, so I was already out there. I'd already had one or two people on staff. But by the summer, when OSD stood up DIUx, we had made the decision that this Air Force Silicon Eagle thing was going to we were going to roll under DIUx and be the Air Force element of DIUx. And of course, Cybercon's team would be the Cyber Command element of DIUx. And so at the early days, it was really the boots on the ground was some Cybercom reservists and some Air Force officers, myself as Lieutenant Colonel, and I had two captains initially. And then we grabbed some National Guard airmen, brought them on, and Taj, Tomer, a few others. And so that was really the early iteration, OSD leadership level, SCS level from OSD, and then worker B level from Cyber Command and the Air Force. And then we brought in, the Navy showed up. Turns out the Navy had some kind of innovation thing going on in Monterey and some other efforts. And we've got some Navy personnel on the staff really early on. John Marburger, a fantastic officer. And so what this really was, the early days of DIUx was really kind of a coalition of the willing of each service, most services, having an idea that they really wanted a presence out there, everybody kind of doing their own thing. And by late summer of 2015, we all kind of coalesced saying, okay, let's work together. Let's be kind of one entity out there. And it was lots of growing pains, by the way. When you have no formal agreements, a lot of people trying to do something, but nobody knows what they're supposed to do and nobody has authorities or money. It was a really kind of Wild West, but lots of fun in the early days.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So I know it became DIUx, I think, August of 15. And then by the time that I got there in 2016, we were in DIUx 2.0. I'm curious if you could give that perspective. So when it was established, it was under USD ATNL, which is not too dissimilar from how we are now in USD RNE. Then it got moved up to SecDef. Curious your perspective. Why did that happen? What was that like? How did it change the way DIUx was able to operate?
Yeah, I think the transition from 1.0 to 2.0 was that was revolutionary. That was like fundamental to DIUx being able to succeed, was that transition from 1.0 to 2.0. And again, so when you look at the people that were there doing 1.0, there's no malice or malintent. It's just we had the wrong structure, we had the wrong incentives. And so it kind of goes back to when we were first setting up the Air Force element, pre-DIUx days. I had the luxury of knowing Joe Felter, and he hooked me up with Steve Blank, great management professor over at Stanford. And Steve Blank has, the three horizon concepts. And one of them is, if you want to do innovative change, that third horizon of innovation, that organization has to be culturally and physically distinct and separate from the organization it's trying to change. And you have to bring the ideas back in, but you can't actually innovate from inside the beast. And that's kind of his concept. He's written about it. Other people have written about this concept. So I think one of the problems we had early on in DIUx 1.0 is the organization that we were trying to change, which was the acquisition system, ATNL, was in charge of directing their own change because they were leading DIUx 1.0. And it wasn't called 1.0 at the time, just called DIUx. And the people that were leading DIUx 1.0 were beholden to that system that they came from. And so it is really hard to push back against dogma and tradition when you were raised in a dogma and tradition, and your future career when you leave DIUx is going to be determined by the people who established that dogma and tradition. And so I think that's probably the biggest problem with DIUx 1.0 is there was physical isolation, great, but there was not enough organizational, cultural isolation. And from inside the acquisition community, we could not do the change we needed. The second part is we didn't really have the top cover for funding, and it's part of being inside the organization. And the same thing happened on the Air Force element. We pushed for our own funding on the Air Force side, but the funding was not coming out of any type of ops budget. It was coming out of the acquisitions portfolio of their experimentation funds. And they had already determined that they had their way of doing experimentation, and their way of doing it was not the same way of our way of doing experimentation. So even outside the OSD side, on the Air Force side, we ran into the same issues internally that we couldn't break. Even though SecAF says we should really do something different, the community that has to say yes was unwilling to do something different. So the radical transition that occurred with 2.0 was really SecDef saying, you know what, this is mine. I care about it, and I care about it enough that I'm going to give it direct oversight, no longer oversight from one level below. I'll give it direct oversight, and I'll give it authority, policy authority, and I'll give DIUx acquisition authority, working with WHS, and I'll give it budgetary authority, and here's its budget. That is, in the Pentagon, we all know this. Unless you have the ability to execute funds, you have no real authority in the Pentagon. And that changed everything. That way we could do real innovation, because we were not trying to fight against, we were not asking for money from people that were trying to change their methodologies. So I thought it was a great transition. I think that really helped us kick off a lot of new projects. And it actually helped us make a name for ourselves, because we were actually able to show some wins.
Definitely. And Kessel Run is proof of that being a reality. So I'd like to finish our conversation with a bit of reflection.
Sure.
Get some lessons from you on what you've learned from your time in DIUx and since. I'd like to start with a quote. Love to get your opinion. So one of the emails you sent to me, you said about these old days, the Fog Silicon Valley and the early DIUx.
Yeah.
I miss those days. I was so young, naive, and optimistic about changing the Air Force quickly. In the 5 years since, I have learned the realities of the Pentagon and acquisitions. Tell us more about the realities
Sure.
of the Pentagon and acquisitions.
Yeah, okay, so let's start. Let me go back real quick. So in my career, the most enjoyable times in my entire career, 23 years, have been my times deployed. Because when you deploy, you're doing the mission. Supported the missions in Bosnia, supported Afghanistan. I've gone down to Colombia. And when you're deployed, nothing else matters except the mission. And people just getting the job done. And there's a camaraderie in getting the job done, knowing that the only thing that matters is success. Early days of DIUx felt like that. Even though we were in that 1.0 structure, we couldn't really get across the finish line. Everybody was so passionate about the fight. We were operating with these horrible Army tables and basically a gigantic empty room. We couldn't get internet, so we went to National Guard and bought some little Wi-Fi routers. We were like begging and pleading people to give us computers. It was just everything was hard to do. We couldn't really succeed, but everybody was passionately moving towards that direction and kind of fighting the good fight. Over time, DIUx had transitioned to 2.0, we started seeing success. It was great. But even as DIUx 2.0 went on, as we grew, we started establishing a lot of rules, a lot of policies, a lot of structure. And it's useful in some cases, but what we seem to have lost while we were at DIUx, even by the third year, the end of my third year there, I feel like we had lost some of the passion for radical change. We started doing a lot of incremental projects. We started doing projects for acquisition organizations that kind of wanted something innovation-like, but they weren't ready to make the big changes, the big transitions. We lost a lot of the emphasis on design thinking, of really thinking through some really dramatic problems and how to scale them. And so I think what happened was we fell into the trap of acquisitions, of following these Pentagon processes. And in many ways, we were pushed into that as DIUx transitioned even out of 2.0 into what it's become today. We were in some ways pushed into that acquisitions system where it's really hard to innovate from the inside and people aren't as comfortable with radical change. And we kind of lost the passion of the super big ideas early on. Now, the stuff we are doing, like what Bucky Buto is doing with space, is still these radical big ideas. What rolled out of then ended up being Maven and Jake. Again, those are radical big ideas that came out of DIUx. All the work on counter drone with Rogue Squadron, those were big ideas. But these were all like big ideas from early days of DIUx that are now maturing. And I'm worried if, again, I'm from the outside now looking at whether we have that. But then my 2 years in Kessel Run, I feel like most of my time is fighting against somebody in a MAGCOM or the Pentagon who's questioning why we're doing what we're doing. I understand that you need to report up, you need to let people know. But in the commercial sector, if you're a company, you have a board of directors and you have some stakeholders. In the DoD, anybody can be your stakeholder and everybody thinks they are your stakeholder. And that's the problem with the bureaucracy. There's at every layer of the acquisitions community, the ops community, the intel community, the cyber community, on both on the operational chain and your functional chain and your Air Force chain and your joint chain. There are literally right now hundreds of people around the Air Force, possibly close to thousands, who think that we owe them status reports and think that we have to get their approval for everything we do. And as my program has grown with Kessel Run, as we have more authorities, as we've taken on bigger portfolios, it feels like more and more people feel like they can say no. And it's really, yeah, I've lost the naivety of my early days, having not been an acquisitions officer. I thought I was just like naive and young, saying, hey, give us some money, we'll do something awesome. I've lost that naivety. I've learned the bureaucracy and I've learned how to manage it in many ways, some ways to go through it, some ways around it, some ways to just work with it. It depends. There's different approaches every time. Every day is slightly different. But I've definitely lost the optimism that we can make radical change in the DoD. Something interesting, obviously we're on this phone call right now during the COVID crisis where the entire DoD has to work remotely. This, more than anything else, I think is going to force that change. And you're seeing it in the Air Force. The Air Force has stepped up. I'm so proud of the Air Force CIO side of the house, Air Force 6 side of the house. The community has stepped up and saying, you know what, that's it. We're going to change it. We're going to get off these old ways of doing business. We're going to make it so airmen can operate remotely, distributedly, everything. And so I think this COVID is actually going to cause radical change that DIUx never could have done, innovators never could have done. What happens is the crisis allows the innovators that are really innovating and really succeeding to step up and actually be recognized and appreciated. So change does happen. Sometimes it takes a catalyst. But yeah, after 5 years of this, yeah, I've learned the realities that I did not know when I first stood it up. When I wrote my first 2-page forward operating base Silicon Valley paper, I thought it was just going to be easy and fun. And my God, we're going to go out there with a couple young airmen and we're going to change the Air Force. It's been a lot harder, but it's worth it. It is. I would not change my career, what I did. I wouldn't change it for anything. I feel like what we did at DIUx, across the board, across all the joint partners at DIUx, I think what we've done has mattered. And we've changed. We've changed the DoD. Even people DoD don't recognize where the change came from. A lot of those ideas from a lot of stuff that's out there right now was grown. It was created there at DIUx by a bunch of really creative people.
Awesome. So I know we're running short on time, but you know, you stood up the initial part of DIUx. You launched one of our arguably most successful projects. You now lead it as a program office. It's kind of the perfect mix of what we could all aspire to in joining as a PM in DIU. So what's next for you?
What's next? I'm retiring. I love the Air Force. I love my time in the Air Force. I'm retiring. There's lots of reasons for that. But I'm not leaving defense innovation and I'm not leaving national security. My plan is to try to do it from the other side. And I think there's a lot of options of how do you disrupt the defense, the defense industrial base? How do you disrupt the current processes? How do you bring new technologies in? And sometimes there's great technologies, but sometimes it takes a former insider to help bring in those technologies because it's as we all know, DIUx is out there because it's harder for commercial companies to break in. I do believe that there is a possibility for a new defense innovation ecosystem. You're seeing it with people like Anduril. You're seeing it with companies like Rebellion. I think there's a possibility for a lot more out there. And even some of the big traditionals in the innovation sphere and the tech sphere, I think there's ways to get some of the bigs into the government space. And so I think I'm still going to work on national security. I still love it. I still, as a Chinese foreign heiress, I still love looking at China and competing against them. I want to start looking at Russia and how we compete against them a little better. But I want to help bring new technology and I want to keep disrupting, but from the outside now. I think it's the right move. I think my ability to disrupt on the inside, I think I've peaked. I've done what I need to do. I've commanded. I've led. I think now I can lead on the outside and still make a difference. So that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Well, at least on behalf of DIU now, I'd like to say thanks for having done that and what you're doing and what you will do in the future. Any closing comments?
No, I just want to say thank you, Zach. And I know you're alone and unafraid out there in Austin. Keep up the good fight. I still believe DIUx is incredible, or DIU, sorry, is incredibly powerful and can make a radical change in the DoD. And I'm so happy that you guys are still there fighting the fight, and keep at it. Thank you.